Hello and welcome back to the AI ML track. Coming up next is a session on building an AI travel agent that never hallucinates with Alan Nichol, Hugo Bowne-Anderson, and Justino Petraitytė. And without further ado, I will hand over to them.
Well, hey everyone. It looks like we may have lost you, but look, it happens. I just hope he's doing well wherever on the information superhighway he ended up. I'm Hugo Bowne-Anderson. I've worked in data science and ML and AI product and education for a while. My background's in research science in biology, but I love helping people figure out how to build software that incorporates data in one form or another. I'd love to introduce you to Alan Nichol and Justina Petraitytė. And maybe you could each just say a few words about yourself as we get started.
Yeah, gladly. So thanks for kicking this off, Hugo. So hi everyone, I'm Alan. I'm a co-founder of a company called Rasa. We build a framework for building, chatbots, voice bots, that kind of thing. Yeah, very happy to be engaged here and be helping out on this tutorial.
Justa?
Yeah, likewise. Super happy to be here today. And so my name is Justa. I have spent almost 10 years in data space, working as a developer advocate for AI and now Web3 spaces as well. And I have been working with the Rasa team since 2018, and so happy to see the community grow, not just for Rasa, but conversational AI in general, and very excited about this session. So yeah, let's get started.
Thanks for those wonderful introductions, and thank you all for joining today. I'd also just like to thank Hugh, Tamara, and the whole team at PyData Global for hosting us and creating a great conference as always. And for all, there's so much hard work that goes into this from volunteers. So I just want to say how much we all appreciate them. We'd love you to introduce yourself in the chat and let us know. I'm actually in Brooklyn, New York at the moment. Alan's in Berlin. Justa, you're in Portugal.
Yes.
Great. So let us know where you're watching from and what your interest is as well. Are you building conversational AI at the moment or chatbots, or are you working on LLM-powered applications, or do you work in data science and you're just trying to get a feel for what's happening in the space? And I really do want to, I'm going to share my screen now. So structurally, we're going to show some slides, talk about the space a bit, and then jump in and start building ASAP. And funnily, okay, I can share my screen now. Alan and Justa, can you confirm that we can see slides?
Sure can. Yeah.
Great. So we're here today to talk about how to build and show you how to build agents that don't hallucinate. Okay, and we'll get to how that actually works when we're using LLMs, because it's not obvious. But what I wanted to start by really thinking about is, I think one of the beautiful things about large language models is that you can give it a prompt in natural language and it will speak back to you probabilistically, and then you can start getting it to do all these things. Now, this is a figure from Landgraf's Build a Customer Support Bot tutorial, to be clear, but this is also one of the huge pain points about such systems, that we have to give it a single, stuff a prompt with everything we want, including all the context we need, and kind of cross our fingers and hope for the best. I think you all will have seen certain failure modes. There's one that happened recently. I can't remember. Maybe it was Ford or Toyota or something like that. I think it may have been Ford, where they had a customer service agent that someone said, "What's the best car?" And the bot responded, "A Tesla," right? So clearly we don't want that type of behavior, particularly in the enterprise. So I just want to get a sense of, if you wouldn't mind dropping in the chat, are these the types of AI assistants you're building currently, and or agents? Are you using agents and these types of things? or are you looking for more kind of ways to incorporate generative AI and large language models in your business use cases and business logic? For example, where you need to specify logic. Because today, what we're really going to get into is how to specify business logic and get your AI assistants operating robustly within certain finite and usually small amounts of business logic. Because I mean, I don't want to build an agent that does absolutely everything. I think we want ones for particular use cases a lot of the time. I do want to step back a bit and just get a bit personal, if I may have that liberty. It's quite relevant. So Alan and Justa I've known for probably the best part of a decade now, and they've been working on conversational AI back in the day with a wonderful open source package called Rasa that allowed all of us working in the Python open source space to build chatbots. This is pre-LLMs, right? And so when I saw all this cool stuff happening with LLMs, I went to them and I went to Alan and I was like, hey, what's up? How do we figure out how to actually incorporate this with the software you've been helping people to build? And Alan told me about CALM, which is what we're going to demonstrate today. And essentially, it is a way to incorporate, business logic and business needs and enterprise needs with the power of generative AI as well. There are a few more moving parts, as you could expect. So it doesn't have like necessarily the demo charm of what we lovingly refer to as prompt and pray. But it we will see how robust and reliable it can be. So Alan, I thought maybe you could tell us a bit about your experience and why prompt and pray isn't fit for enterprise.
Yeah, gladly. We're getting some feedback in the chat that the slides look a little blurred. Do you maybe want to try like unsharing and resharing your screen? It also looks a little like it's in a square aspect ratio for some reason instead of a 16:9 or 3:4, whatever it's meant to be.
Absolutely, and I apologize for that. It is 7:30 a.m. for me, so everything is blurred currently. That's why I didn't pick up on that. How does that look now?
Same, really?
Okay, I'm going to try one more thing to actually. And if this doesn't work, I might see if Justa or Alan, you could. Oh, this is great. Sorry, I just saw a comment. I'm still an LLM skeptic, no offense, but want to know what's out there. None taken. I identify as a Luddite in like the historical sense of the word. I also love someone asked, is there a caffeinate image filter that deblurs? It's funny you ask that because one of my favorite terminal commands is caffeinate, which keeps your entire OS awake. It won't go to sleep if you execute caffeinate and keep it running as a process. Okay, I'm going to share the entire screen. How does that look now?
Much better, at least for me.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Same here. Looks great. Oh, look at all these thumbs up. Everyone's overjoyed.
Amazing. Well, Alan, why don't you tell us about the church?
Well, yeah, but maybe if you back up one slide first, I think I think maybe speaking a little more to this diagram and maybe something we're like what we're building today and how we're contrasting it against, I think, what we're seeing a lot out there in the internets in terms of what's the right way to build or how do people build applications with LLMs. And I think there's an approach that a lot of people advocate for where, the best way to build with LLMs is that you provide the LLM with a list of like APIs it can use or tools it can use. And you don't really do anything beyond that. And, it's up to the job. It's the LLM's job to say, hey, here's something the user wants to do. Let me make a plan and let me figure out what's the right set of steps and what's the right way to call this API and the right, set of questions to ask and all that kind of thing. And that's not what we're going to be doing today. So I think we also wanted to sort of do a quick pulse check in the room. And I see that, people are a lot keener to share reactions with a thumbs up than to post in the chat. But I would say, however you feel comfortable sharing your feedback, whether it's adding a little reaction here or posting some comments in the chat, would love to understand where everybody's coming from in terms of your attitude towards, building sort of agentic chatbots, or building chatbots where the LLM kind of does everything for you versus having a little bit more control. Are you building these kinds of applications? Do you have some experience with it? What are you curious about? What made you join the session? Any sort of context you want to share with us, just so we can, really tailor the session to the audience here and make sure that we're hitting on the right points. So yeah, don't be shy. 3, 2, 1. Everybody post something in the chat. Thanks for getting the ball rolling, Amit. Maybe there's also a caffeinate button that makes everybody a little keener to interact in an online session. Yeah, very cool. Okay, thank you all for starting to share. Please don't be shy and chime in also throughout the session. Whatever you're thinking about these things.
Please do ask questions as well. We're here to answer as many questions as we can also.
Absolutely. Okay, now if you can progress, please, Hugo. So this is a cartoon I like to show of this is sort of the architecture of pretty much every LLM app that I've ever seen. And I call this approach prompt and pray. You throw a bunch of stuff and you hope that the right thing comes out. And I think what we've all experienced is that you change the prompt slightly and you get a very different output. And the only way to know how the output's going to change is just to run it and try and see what happens, right? So it's a very difficult way. It's very different from the way we're used to building software, the way we're used to building applications. You kind of, leaving a lot to chance every time. So if you go to the next slide, when you extend this idea to then talking about RAG, RAG is a wonderful thing, and it's a fantastic way to build sort of information retrieval systems that, is much nicer than the way we used to have to build FAQ data sets and build classifiers and all that kind of stuff. But it doesn't fundamentally change this picture, right? It just means that we do some steps beforehand to pull some relevant context into the answer. But, fundamentally, it's the same. You have this LLM step, which is sort of like a blender, and it mixes everything together, and you get some kind of response out at the end. And then if you go one more slide further, then you get these approaches, which some people call agentic or multi-agent or whatever, where you basically take the diagrams that we had before and you iterate on them. So you prompt and pray, then you take the output from the LLM and you feed it back into the LLM and you kind of iterate. And each time you do that, you expand the level of uncertainty and you reduce the level of control you have over the application, right? And so I think the reason I drew this cartoon is just I see a lot of blog posts and frameworks and ideas and things out there that sort of claim to build, robust agents or make LLM apps more reliable, that don't really do anything. When you look under the hood, you look a little more carefully, it's really just prompt and pray with just some extra fluff around the outside. So not sure if anyone has questions or comments on that, but that's at least how I see, I think, some of the background, some of the context to the session today.
Appreciate that very much, Alan. So I'm wondering now if you wouldn't mind just telling us a bit about CALM and what we're going to be building today and how that differs from the paradigm that we've just talked about.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether you want to give it actually a bit of historical flavor as well with respect to how NLU was used, pre-LLMs and these types of things as well. That might be useful.
Yeah, for sure. So and I'm just enjoying reading some of the comments coming in here. So please do keep them coming. So, okay, so the short version is today's tutorial, we're using a system called CALM. And what it does is it extends LLMs with an engine for executing your business logic. So if you have, a chatbot that's doing something for a user, so, in a consumer use case, I don't know, maybe you're booking a restaurant for them or you're booking a hotel, you have some information you need from the user, right? You need to know when they're checking in, when they're checking out, what city they're going to, any other preferences. And then you probably need to call an API to check for availability, and then you want to maybe confirm with them beforehand if they want to finalize the booking or if they have any extra requests. So you have like a pretty a simple set of steps. And so what CALM gives you is the ability to say, okay, those are the steps that I need to do to complete this task for the user. So I can write those down. And CALM handles the like having a conversation part around it. So when users say something indirect, or they change their mind, or they switch from one topic to another, or they correct something they said earlier, like all the nuance and all the complexity of having a really fluid conversation, that's all handled automatically. But the part of like actually executing those steps, saying, hey, I have this information, this is what I need to know next, I'm going to call this API, now I have to ask this question, that stuff is just handled by like a logical engine. And so rather than saying, building this kind of system where the LLM has to guess, hey, what would people like to do for a hotel booking? You know what you have to do for a hotel booking, and so that's written down and executes it reliably, right? So this has some big advantages over the sort of naive, like, let the LLM figure everything out approach, right? The first is it's much more reliable, right? Because we're not just hoping that the LLM does the right thing. We have some guarantees. It's also much faster and uses far fewer tokens. So if you look at some of these implementations, in each of these intermediate steps, the LLM is generating like 100 tokens, 200 tokens, whatever, feeding it back in, and it just takes forever, right? Like calling LLMs in series, over and over again takes a very long time. It's very expensive. It's very slow. And so we're not doing any of that. So we're just saying, hey, look, we're going to use LLMs for what they're great at, which is, understanding natural language, manipulating natural language, taking structured data and representing it in a nice way. But we're not going to, trust LLMs to sort of guess our business process for us. So I don't know if you have any flavor you want to add to that, but that's a sort of a high level picture. And since you asked about the historical perspective, so Rasa has been around for a minute. Founded in 2016. So we had quite a bit of experience of thinking about conversation, thinking about the structure of conversations, thinking about the kinds of conversations that businesses specifically, like enterprises, want to automate. And so CALM is really designed with like conversation in mind, conversation first, right? So we actually started from hundreds of specific conversational patterns that we wanted to enable with the engine. And we said, look, with this new breed of LLMs, we can do much more. How do we build a system that can handle all of this complexity, all of this nuance? And we kind of work backwards from that. We, created that in conjunction with conversation designers and, everything that we know about, what our customers want to build. And we just said, can we build an engine that can handle all of this complexity while still giving you the sort of the guarantees and the peace of mind that your bot's not going to go rogue and hallucinate a bunch of stuff.
Super cool. Thank you for both that description and that context, Alan. And I'll add just one more bit of flavor that I really like is that back in the day, pre-LLMs, it wasn't dialogue understanding that you would use to build these types of things per se, but it was NLU, right? Natural language understanding and trying to extract intents and this type of stuff from user inputs. And this is a wonderful example of something which LLMs are really good at, whereas executing actual business logic isn't. So that really just speaks to, getting it working with other things in the stack and getting the things to do what they're good at, essentially, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And
Very
so you can, I think one of the things that made, if you go back to the pre-LLM era of building chatbots, the thing that made those chatbots so brittle, it wasn't that we didn't have good models. The problem was that the sort of the understanding piece of the chatbot was just a classifier.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, we're at PyData, so we can talk about classifiers. So,
Right.
And it's not about like the quality of your classifier. It's just the fact that you're treating this as a classification problem, but it's not a classification problem, right? Like humans, when they talk, they don't think of some intent class, some class label, and then think of a way to express that, right? And so what you see a lot of the time is this mismatch between like how end users think about the world and how your system is designed, and these things don't always align, and then you're trying to crowbar everything into this fixed set of classes, and that's really where a lot of the brittleness from chatbots came out. And so what's really nice in this modern era is that we can free ourselves from the tyranny of everything has to be a classifier, everything has to be classified into one of these classes.
The tyranny of classification. I love it. So we have said we're going to help you figure out how to build agents that don't hallucinate. So we want to speak directly to this. After this slide, we're going to jump in and start building and playing with our AI assistants. But Alan, I was wondering if you could just talk us through this table and talk about, the fact how we are solving the hallucination problem.
Yes, for sure. I'm just responding to Ade here in the chat.
Great.
Good. Okay. Yes. Okay. There's a very simple and very dumb answer to the big mysterious question of how do we guarantee no hallucinations. It is to use templated responses, right? And so something you can do with CALM is you can build an assistant that's fully sort of LLM native, right? Has all the nuanced understanding power of an LLM. Can understand, people being really ambiguous, clarifying what they say over multiple turns, implying an answer rather than saying something directly, right? Like one of my favorite examples from an airline where they asked the user, are you traveling in economy class? And the person said, sadly. That's like, those implicit answers that are obvious to you and I, but very difficult for a classification model. In like this LLM world, we can fully do that. So you get all of that power, that nuanced understanding, but you can, configure your system with CALM to only ever use templated responses. So you can put your hand on your heart and say to all your colleagues and anyone who might ask, there's no risk of this thing hallucinating because we don't give it the opportunity to do so, right? Now, there are lots of good use cases where you might want to like loosen that restriction, right? So one piece of CALM is like allowing some rephrasing of responses. CALM also very natively integrates with RAG, and so you can have conversations that switch between the kind of doing a task and like answering some information, some Q&A. So there's good opportunities where you might want to sort of loosen that restriction and say, look, I'm allowing a little bit of risk here. I'm going to like rephrase this answer slightly, do some paraphrasing here. But you can absolutely turn it down all the way to 0 and still build something very good. Maybe the way I think about this table here of like, when do you want the LLM to guess the steps? And when do you want to write down the steps for some process, right? Booking a car or resetting a password or, ordering something. And I think maybe the clue is a little bit in the word agents. And, an agent is a representative, and it's a question of like, who does the agent represent? And if I'm building something to represent myself and go and interact with the outside world, with the whole internet, and like do things on my behalf, you know what? Like that's very open-ended, and that it might really make sense to sort of allow some of that creativity. But if I'm a business and I want to like enable somebody to, replace a card that they lost or block something or, reset their phone number, some other person, like I don't want to give them that freedom, right? I just want to like as efficiently as possible automate that process in a way that's going to give them a good user experience. There's no creativity required. There's no creativity desired either, right? You just want things to be sort of reliably executed. Yeah, so that's maybe
creativity is actually an anti-pattern there, right? We don't want that type of creativity.
Right. Yeah. And you see this a lot with these sort of React style implementations where then, the chatbot's trying to be really helpful and is like offering some extra options that just like, there's no API for that. There's no option for that. Hey, would you like this too? Would you also like a foot massage? And it's like, they're very keen to please, but they, they're offering things that don't actually exist, right?
Exactly. So perhaps then, without further ado, we should jump into building some travel agents. So the way we're going to do that is we've set up a repository here, and I'm going to put this in the chat if I can. I just opened up and someone wrote, "This is such an awesome tour." Awesome. That's nice to see. So this is the repository. And what you're going to do is you're going to click here and you're going to click, let me see, create code space on main. And so what we've done is we've set up, they named them so wonderfully. Mine is called Stunning Carnival, which is very nice. What that's going to do is it's going to open up something that looks like this. Can you see my code space, Alan and Justa?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
And also, just a quick note, should we mention the other branch just so that people know about it?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so that's very important. So yes, if you're on the main branch, but there are two ways to do what we're going to do. One is to use OpenAI, which is what I'm going to do. And if you don't have an OpenAI key, I'll give you one you can use. Please don't tax it too hard. The other one is to use a different implementation, and you would go onto this branch to do it. And maybe Justa, you can say a couple of things about this.
Yeah, just very quickly. So I will talk about that a little bit later in more details, but we're experimenting with smaller models and trying to see how they perform for CALM assistance. So we have one implementation that is done with non-OpenAI models. So they are fine-tuned models available through Hugging Face. And basically, this implementation would allow to run it. You will not need OpenAI key here. And all of the steps that Hugo will cover will be exactly the same. You just have to be on this branch if you prefer to run it. It has few limitations. It's a smaller model, so you might see some different outcomes at times. So this is expected, but this is just in case you would like to try out non-OpenAI implementation. But Hugo will run the one with OpenAI. So you can basically choose which one you prefer.
Exactly. And in the second half of this workshop as well, Justa will take us through a lot more of the fine-tuning stuff as well. And yeah, to Justa's point, this is a smaller model, and we've put it on Hugging Face and hosted it so you can use it. But to be clear, you can host these yourself as well, which means you won't need to ping external APIs. And I mean, it's also significantly cheaper. You know, as we've all seen, you know, individual tokens aren't that expensive, but they definitely add up. But on top of that, you know, as you build out more and more production LLM powered software, you do want to think about your governance boundary and pinging external APIs. You definitely have a different set of governance and data privacy and these types of things than you do being able to run your own self-hosted models as well. But that's, I mean, that was a brief detour on self-hosted versus otherwise, but these are incredibly important decisions for a lot of businesses. So you'll click open new code space and it will open something that looks like VS Code. So could we just get a pulse check and see whether people have been able to do this? I don't know whether Alan, you're able to, or Justa able to ask and get thumbs up or something. If people are able to get thumbs up.
Yeah, please let us know. Usually it takes a little bit of time, like a few seconds to maybe a minute or so. Especially a non-OpenAI implementation might take a little bit longer. But yeah, let us know how you're getting on with that.
And what I'm going to do is paste the OpenAI key if you want to use one. And please be nice. Don't set up a production app that you scale to, like, you know, meta scale. That'd be cool. But this is an OpenAI key. And so actually what I'm going to do is give you the entire export command you can use. So that's what you can use. So there's a bit of setup that needs to take place, but significantly less than if there was no code space. So you'll need two things. You'll need either an OpenAI key, and I've given you one that you can use there, or be able to or need to use the model on Hugging Face that we've described
Yeah,
here.
but you don't need any keys for that one, so don't worry about it there.
Exactly. And you'll also need a Rasa Pro license. These are free. So if I'll actually, this Rasa Pro Developer Edition. And so maybe, Alan, you can say a bit more about that.
Yeah, for sure. So totally free, unrestricted use of Rasa Pro, like on your laptop or your code space or anything like that for development. There's also an extended version of the license that lets you deploy a production app that can handle up to 1,000 conversations a month, and all of that's sort of within the free tier. So should be, more than good enough to get going and get moving and build stuff and get as far along as you'd like to.
Amazing. Thanks for that. So now to get this set up, okay, what we're going to do is, you can see we have our terminal down here. So for those who haven't used VS Code, this is a code space, which is essentially a VS Code in the browser. You have, like many IDEs, you have your local file system here. Then you can have scripts here. You can have notebooks there, those types of things. And we've got our terminal down here. And what you can actually see is I've created another terminal by pushing the plus button there. So you can see, pardon me, I've got two different terminals. So in order to make sure this worked for me before we joined this session, I did run a few things. So what I'm going to get you to do is open two terminals, then in both terminals run source.vn/bin/activate. Just notice that in code spaces, you can't always copy and paste in the way you'd want to. Your keyboard bindings change, so you may need to use this paste there. So do that, and that will activate the environment that we've pre-installed that will give you access to all the packages you need. Then what I want you to do is open CALM. Under CALM LLM, you'll see there's a .env. I want you to open this. I'm not going to open it because my keys are in there. But what you'll see is exactly this. And you'll want to put your Rasa Pro license key there, and then the OpenAI key I've given you if you're using OpenAI there. And if you're on the other branch, you won't need that at all. Okay.
Yeah, just only Rasa Pro license that will be necessary there.
Exactly. And so then in both terminals, so these are setting these keys as environment variables. To actually do it, what you do is run source CALM_LLM/.env, and that will just make sure that they're in your environment. Okay. There's one other thing before we can start using Rasa that I want you to do, which is in one of your terminals, run Python scripts/create_db.py. This will create a database. Remember, we're building a travel AI assistant, pardon me, a travel AI agent, travel assistant AI agent, and this will create a database that gives it a few things with respect to what your flights are and these types of things. So if you do that, and it's already there, but I just want to make sure. Python. No, I'm actually in the wrong directory. Yeah, so you'll want to do this. Okay. Now, after you've done that, what I want you to do is cd into change your directory to CALM LLM, and that's where all our files will be. And so we're going to run an assistant that we've pre-built now, and then we're going to start talking through kind of the directory structure that allows this to work. So the two things we're going to do are we're going to Rasa train here. I always do this. Sorry, I was in the wrong directory. So I'm going to just make it slightly bigger. So cd, change directory into CALM LLM, and then Rasa train. I'm going to Rasa train in one terminal, and in the other, I'm going to Rasa run actions. Alan, do you want to tell us a bit about these two things I'm doing?
Yeah, for sure. So the Rasa run actions runs essentially like a little serverless server. So the actions in Rasa, you can think of them like Lambda functions or something like that. So you get to some point in your conversation where you need to like invoke a function. And so there's a very straightforward sort of HTTP API that says, so for example, if you need to go and like check an API in the middle of a conversation to see if, I don't know, hotels are available or if there's, flight bookings that are possible. So reading or writing to external systems, that's done through a custom action, and that's part of the action server. This is actually slightly more complex than it needs to be. In the latest versions of Rasa, you can actually run these all in the same process, but for now we're still running them as two separate ones. So you have one sort of main process that's like you're running chatbot, and then you have other one that is executing these sort of Lambda functions for you.
Fantastic. Thanks for that context. And what about Rasa train, Alan?
Yeah. So Rasa train takes everything that's takes everything that's defined as part of your chatbot and sort of bundles it up into an archive, a tarball, and that sometimes involves actually training a model, right? So actually doing some gradient descent and training some models, but that depends on like exactly what configuration you have. So if you have a brand new assistant and you're using kind of a pure LLM approach where everything pretty much is just kind of some prompt engineering and that kind of thing, then the training step is very lightweight and there's no actual model training that happens. You're just like bundling some strings and some metadata into an archive. But as you build up more advanced things in Rasa, this can involve like training a classifier, training an entity recognition model, all sorts of other things.
Awesome. I appreciate all that deep context. So with Rasa trained, with Rasa run actions, now where I did the run actions, it will have this process running. In the other one, Rasa train should have finished, and now I'm going to Rasa inspect, and you can run that, but I'm going to put in debug mode in case we need that. And what we'll see is that will open something in a second called the Rasa inspector. Ta-da! And you may get a pop-up saying your application is running, open in browser, or it may pop up depending on your browser configuration. But here we are. Alan and/or Justa, do you want to tell me what I'm looking at?
Go for it, Justa.
Yeah, so this is a very useful console in your browser that you can use to talk to your assistant, just like Hugo is showing. You can send messages, get responses, and then what you will see once there is a specific flow that is activated, you will see the flow displayed on your screen. Maybe, Hugo, we can do a quick example of that.
Absolutely. So
Okay.
as you've seen, I've just said to it, "Hi, what's up?" It's like, "How can I help you?" I'm like, "I don't know. How can you help me, travel assistant?" And it tells me it can list flight bookings. And once again, we'll see in the code soon how we've achieved this. Can list flight bookings or change them, book rental cars. First, I was like, "Oh, cool, list my flights," and I wanted to put some typos just to make sure. A flight from Paris to Basel on April 30. I've always wanted to go to Basel, actually. So now, to Justa's point, I can't travel on April 30, though. I want to change my flights. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So as you can see, now we have a specific flow that was activated. Maybe we can also cover later on a little bit what flows are. But basically, this is where you see the business logic being executed. And you can see where in your flow or that business logic your assistant currently is and what step it is executing. So for example, right now, it is looking at the flight search start date. And it just asked the user, what is your preferred departure date and so on. So using this UI, you can test your assistant, you can have conversations, and you can actually see what your assistant is thinking at a specific time, what flow is running, what tasks are being executed, and so on. And the same information is also displayed on your left-hand side. You can see all of the slots that are being filled in and basically everything that is happening in the conversation under the hood.
Thank you so much for all of that.
If I can,
rich context.
if I can add another little bit of context, just to tie it back to the slides we showed earlier, right? And we talked about how CALM separates out executing the business logic from having a conversation. And I think this screen is like a really good moment to talk about that in very concrete terms. So what we see in the middle panel are the steps in this particular process, right? So if we're going to book a flight for somebody, right, these are the steps we need to do. We need to like know which date range we're looking for. We need to execute a search. We need to ask the user if they like any of those options, all those kinds of things. But what this isn't is it's not like a map of all the possible conversations that someone can have. And I think it's a very important thing to get your head around. So if somebody now switches topic and starts asking about a hotel booking, we'll just switch over to the hotel booking flow, right? Even though there's no explicit
actually, Alan.
line. Yeah, do it. Yeah.
The assistant has said, "What's your preferred departure date for this trip?" And I'm chill with that date. That date's actually cool for me. So actually, I'll misspell that. Book hotel instead.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So really nice. Yeah. So we just switched over to a different process, right? So you don't have to explicitly define, all the ways that somebody can jump from one topic to another, all the ways that people can change their mind about something they said earlier. If they're asking follow-up questions, contextual questions, all of that complexity is handled automatically by CALM.
Fantastic. And I'm going to just say, I want to check in April 30. Okay. And then maybe May 10. And before I do this, Alan, do you want to just tell me a bit about, I see something called utter invalid date here. And what I presume is happening there is it's doing some sort of slot validation. Can you tell me a bit about this, and then how it, and we can get into that when we look at the code as well, how that relates to, how people might use unit tests or PyTest or something along those lines, if they're building more LLM, doing the prompt and pray vibe.
Well, I mean, I think maybe the first thing to call out is that when you and I first started working on that comparison project, which is the repo that we're sharing with folks here, and we were looking at this sort of initial agentic implementation of this AI travel assistant that, doesn't have the guarantee against hallucinations. One of the first things we saw when we started playing with it was, it was offering hotel bookings where the checkout date came before the check-in date, which is a pretty horrendous error, right? So that's obviously the kind of validation you want to be doing, mid-conversation. If somebody gives you a checkout date, or if somebody, tries to suggest a checkout date that, doesn't make sense for whatever logical reason, you could do that. And I see you're pulling up the blog post here. I think I can find it pretty quickly.
Yeah, I have it here. And
you got it here.
I just want to say our intention is not to denigrate any other tools. All tools have their purpose. And these types of React style agents are great for open-ended types of things. But as you can see, and this is not me, the creation of this slide. This is not on Rasa or Alan or Justa. But I was amazed how many times LangGraph would offer me, a checkout date after a check-in date. This is 3 options, and it was 2 out of 3. This happened 3 out of 5 times, and we're doing some work at the moment to quantify how flaky it actually is. But this happened a huge amount. Even 1% of the time could actually be a deal breaker for enterprise. But this happened far too often, didn't it, Alan?
Yeah, no, for sure. But yeah, even if it's just user provided, input rather than the LLM making stuff up, right? You want to validate that the user gave you some valid inputs rather than waiting until all the way at the end of the conversation and say, oh, actually that thing you said earlier doesn't make sense, right? So this is just the kind of branching logic you build in, and just do some quick sanity checks. And if you don't have any API responses, if you don't have any availability, you can quickly let the user know, that kind of thing, rather than sort of giving them the runaround.
Fantastic. And so I'm checking in April 30, leaving May 10. I've got to finish this. Alan, you know me pretty well. Do I want the luxury, the upper upscale, or the mid scale?
I mean, luxury, obviously.
Dude, yeah. Seriously. I need more context. This needs more. So let's get luxury. Yes. Okay, so it's taking through this flow. Great news. And no flow is currently active. We've finished that flow, and we're good to go. So how does maybe we could just get a pulse test to see if people, could you ask in the chat whether people were able to play with it in the
yeah, yeah, okay, let's do another quick one. Yeah, thumbs up if you've chatted. So we only had 4 people confirm that they got the code space running. So I hope that in the interim, more people got it running and just didn't tell us yet.
Yeah, and oh, thanks, Christopher. Christopher said this is so cool. And people are giving thumbs up in the chat, not only to the comments, I think. So, but yeah, are the provided hotel options actually coming from an API call? They're actually coming from the database, if I recall correctly. So it is.
Yeah, I'm just going to link to the specific to the actual implementation.
Okay, fantastic. So,
And
before we
just
jump
very
in,
quickly, Hugo, there is a follow-up question. If
cool.
API would be possible, which I would say certainly would.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's your
Yeah.
choice if you want to use a database or API or anything else to pull the data in from.
Yeah, possible and necessary in many cases as well. But don't forget, if you are doing an API call, you do need to build some like caption retries and this type of stuff, right? Because we've all been hit by, you know, APIs that don't return what you want when you want it as well. So once again, that speaks to just building more robust, reliable software. So now we're going to jump into the files and see what actually allows us to build such an assistant. But Alan, maybe we can just look at this diagram first, and you can talk us through a bit of it to understand what's happening in the file structure.
Yeah, for sure. So the units
Tell me if you want me to go to the actual directory at any point as well. I can switch back and forth.
Will do for sure. So yeah, so the units of the units of functionality of like skills or whatever, if you will, in your assistant are these flows, right? So each flow defines, here's the thing I want to achieve for the user, and to do so it might be like booking a hotel, and to do so I need these 3 bits of information from the user, and I need this information from the API, and here's like the branching logic. So that was the things we saw on the middle panel of the Rasa inspector earlier. And so the way that CALM works is we use an LLM to translate the conversation, like what the user is saying, the whole back and forth. We translate it into a kind of machine language that says, this is what the user is trying to do to progress the conversation. And Hugo, there's an ask here if we can switch to presentation mode, because I think the text is a bit small.
Oh yeah.
If you even want to just zoom in or increase the size of the diagram or something like that, I think it's totally valid.
Okay, let me. I'm just gonna, this is some real DIY slide kung fu. Look at that. That's the best I can do.
Cool. Okay. And so the way that it works is that we use an LLM to translate what the user is saying into like what that means, right? So in the very simplest case, if somebody says, I want to book a hotel, that just gets translated into start the flow for booking a hotel. So there's a command that says start flow and it has as argument book hotel. So that's like the simplest possible case. But the commands themselves, they're quite a rich language to describe all the things that users might be doing, right? So if they're filling a slot or a variable, right, like they're telling you a date, or they're making some chit chat, or they're correcting themselves, or they're answering a question and then starting a different flow, or they want to cancel what they're doing, like there's quite a rich set of things that you can do to describe what you're trying to achieve, sort of in the context of this conversation. And so that's the dialogue understanding component on the left. So we take the user input, we take the conversation so far, we take some other contextual information, and that helps us understand, right? So to go back to the example that I gave earlier, right? If you say, if you ask the user, hey, are you traveling in economy class? And they say sadly, right? You will get out a command that says, economy, like set the value of economy class to true, right? So it gives you like what is implied by what the user is saying in the conversation at this point, like what's it implying in the context of your business logic. And then what happens is the engine will go and execute your business logic and go to the next step and decide what to do. By default, when it reaches this step where it then needs to like ask the user for more information or tell the user something or execute an action, if it's sending some data back to the user, if it's telling the user something, by default, it's going to use the templated answer, right? And then you can optionally, you can have that be rephrased to sound a bit more contextual, or you can just take the template as is, right? Again, depends on your appetite for risk. But the rephrasing can be really nice, right? Especially if you're, if somebody asks for something that's out of scope, hey, can you like order me a pizza, or hey, can I rent a bicycle while I'm on this trip, or whatever else. It's not a lot of fun to say, sorry, I can't help with that, right? The user feels a lot more understood if you say, I'm sorry, I can't, do bicycle trips. I can't organize a bicycle tour yet, or something like that. So you can acknowledge what the user is saying. So this sort of like having a little bit of rephrasing magic sprinkled on top, is a very nice feature, but it's entirely optional.
So I'm going to just say, can you organize a mountain climbing trip for me? So I've never done this before, but
I'm curious to see what it comes up with.
interesting.
Yeah.
So it looks like it's wigged out slightly. And that may be due to the fact that we have rephrasing enabled too much here.
Yeah, I think we also have chit chat enabled at the moment. So do we want to talk about how to lock the whole thing down?
Exactly. And why don't we actually do that?
Yeah.
So, and to do that, maybe we talk through a bit through the file structure here. So we have, I think, the important things to look at: config.yaml, which will be this specifies, you can see this is where we're using OpenAI. And you'll notice in the non-OpenAI implementation, yeah, you see Justa has put kindly this is the code llama, the fine-tuned code llama, which we'll get to in a bit, but that's where you specify that, among other things. Then under data, you have all these flows. So these are the flows that you can jump into. So are there any in particular you'd like to look at, Alan?
Any particular flows? Oh, in terms of locking down the rephrasing?
No, I just meant to explain to people kind of what these flows look like.
Yeah.
Maybe
yeah, I mean,
bookings is good.
This is a relatively straightforward one. So the minimal definition of a flow, right? You have a name, which is list bookings here, or it's an ID, and it has a description. And the description is actually what's used to then decide, is this the right thing to do for the user, right? So this is sort of used then in the dialogue understanding component to say, hey, the user is asking this, they're saying this, then this is probably, the thing that we want to do for the user is like invoke this flow. And then the meat of it is really this list of steps, right? And so you get a couple of different kinds of steps. Mainly you get some steps that just ask the user for information. So those are called collect steps, where you say, okay, you need to know a date, or you need to know a preference, or you need to know a city, or whatever it might be. So you have collect steps, and then you have sort of action steps, where you're then just doing something, right? So the difference being that a collect step, you're going to wait for user input before you progress. And an action step, you're just going to do something and then go to the next step, right? And then in here, you also have some branching logic. So it's not just a flat list of steps, but depending on what happens throughout the conversation, you obviously can branch to different points. And this is obviously a very, very simple example. You can make these things more nuanced. So you can, for example, you can link, you can kind of use some flows as subroutines. If you have, for example, an authentication flow that's shared among multiple business processes, or you have a follow-up survey that you send at the end of every conversation. There's all sorts of ways you can modularize and reuse these flows. Another piece you can do is you can define conditions that have to be true for a flow to even be considered as a thing that you might do for the user, right? So if you have certain flows that are only available to premium users, that's just like a very simple example, right? Then you can set a condition on a flow and say, this one is only for premium users, and that just guarantees that, it's only for a certain type of profile. Otherwise, it's not even considered as a candidate. So this is a very simple example. It gets a bit richer, of course. encourage you to read the documentation and learn a bit more, or check out Yusta, who's here. She has an excellent a video series on YouTube on building assistants with CALM. Maybe also a quick plug for that, Yusta, if you want to drop the link in to the chat, if anybody wants to like follow up and watch your videos on how to build things with CALM. It's a great series.
Fantastic. And then, so Alan, let's now look at, there are a lot of flows here, or several. Then it wasn't patterns. Which was the one that I need to edit?
I think we can just go to the domain, and we go to the shared domain, and we just go to the last response, right? So here, so we have configured here to handle the chit chat, so like small talk, you know, how's the weather, how you doing, all that kind of stuff, with a generative model, right? So it's using the same code llama model, but it's just allowing it to generate a free form response. And here we can, you know, lock that down with just a canned response, or we can define like a list of responses to choose from. And so here's one place we can lock that down if we want to just disable the chit chat functionality and just say we're just not going to touch that. And the other place you can configure it is if you go to your endpoints YAML file.
I'm just going to add, I can't do chit chat at the moment. Then I'm a travel assistant that can, so I'm allowing it to.
Cool.
So, yeah. Okay. And then, sorry, then go to, what did you say?
Your endpoints YAML.
Yep.
Yep. And then just comment out this whole NLG section. So this is where you configure, I'm going to use this LLM to take my templated responses and like rephrase them to make them a little more contextual.
Very cool.
So you can just disable that.
Great. And I should be good to retrain now?
Yep.
So after this, everyone, we're going to jump in, and Justa's going to tell us a bit about testing, evaluation, optimization, and fine-tune models as well. So inspect. Whoa. Sorry, AirMeet is actually blocking my, okay, I can hide that. Whoa, what did I do? Okay.
While you're doing that, I might actually answer we got a question in the Q&A from Christopher Ployce, who asked, is there a reason we're using GPT-4 June 13th in the config? Is it working better than the more creative GPT-4o or GPT-4o mini? Well, the short answer is yes, absolutely. So we're currently working on optimizing the system to also work with 4o, also because 4 is being deprecated, and 4 is also like pretty expensive and slow. Out of the box, you won't get like the best performance you will get out of the box with no work on your end today is just using that GPT-4 model. But you know, we do really encourage anyone who wants to run it, you know, serious scale, to run in production, to look at some of the model fine-tuning stuff, because you can actually take an 8 billion parameter llama model, and sorry, I'm getting ahead of what you're about to say, Yusta, but you can get a llama 3 8 billion, and you can match the performance of GPT-4 for this dialogue understanding task. And then you have a model you can deploy yourself, run yourself, host yourself. But that said, I know it's a roadmap item for the beginning of the year, beginning of 2025, to get out of the box support for GPT-4o and some of the other more recent models.
Very cool, and thanks for that, Alan. So you can see here that I said, hi, what's up? What can you do? It told me what it can do. I had 2 typos in this, and I didn't even know what I meant there, to be honest. I wanted list flights. Don't know how to respond to that. That's fine. And it tells me what it can do. Then I said list flights. It did that. And then I wrote cool. And previously would have been like, hey, thanks. I am cool, or something like that. And now it says I can't do chit chat at the moment, as I asked it to. And then it told me what it can do. Then I said change flights, and it jumped in, changed my flights accordingly, which is super cool. So I encourage you all to play around with that. And so this is already a pre-built assistant, right? Play around with it, but do also, I've linked to the tutorial, and I think Justa may have linked to the YouTube videos in the chat. But what you can do is, you know, in this repository, just a sec. Yeah. In this repository, once again, you can, well, wherever it is, you can spin up a code space immediately and do Rasa init template, and it will give you a template. The other thing that we won't get into today, but I do want to include, I wish we had time for this, but you know, you can't have time for everything in this world that gets your attention constantly. Alan has built a really interesting skill generator, which allows you to, instead of writing YAML yourself, to describe what type of Rasa skills you want, and it will generate them for you as well. It's currently in beta, but it does a lot of very, very cool stuff also. So all that having been said, I'd like to hand over to Justa. Justa, do you want to share the slides on your screen, or would you like me to?
No, I can continue. So good.
Great.
Will be easier. Yeah, so it's really the next step. Like we spoke a lot about, you are building your assistant, you are talking to it, you are testing, you're seeing how, by testing I mean talking to it and seeing how it performs and how it can handle conversations. But it's also really important to do a little bit more and quantitative testing and evaluation, so that you can get a better sense of the actual performance of your assistant, to spot where you might need to do some improvements, and also to compare how specific setup that you're using is performing against other possible implementations. Testing overall is something that you have to, of course, think as you build your assistant, and you also have to understand like what kind of assistant you're building and what kind of options you have to in terms of testing. Like, for example, if you are building a system that is very open-ended, I think the best example that I can think of is some kind of chat companion that doesn't really have specific tasks to perform, but it's more conversational, and any kind of chat that you will have with this kind of assistant will go a different way. And it's going to be really difficult to evaluate that kind of assistant, because you don't really have any specific benchmark, like how to evaluate if your assistant did the right thing, if it performed well, if it didn't make mistakes, and so on. But what we see developers that use Rasa and what kind of what kind of assistants they build is that those assistants are meant to do something, do specific tasks in a specific field. For example, customer services assistant like banking or insurance, or travel assistants like we're building today. And in those kind of situations, when, let's say, in banking or travel, when the user asks for a specific thing, for example, to book a hotel, or in banking to send money to a specific account, we can probably quite easily map out a comprehensive list of steps that an assistant would have to execute to get to successful completion of a task that the user asked. And with this kind of system, you can actually measure how your assistant performs to follow specific business logic, to complete the tasks, and so on. And you can actually see where your assistant makes mistakes, and so on. And this is what in Rasa we call end-to-end testing. And it's a very important step when building your assistant. With end-to-end testing, you are basically crafting these end-to-end conversations that you are comparing your actual assistant's performance against. And you can see how well your assistant does or compared to the expected behavior. And on top of that, you can get some quantitative metrics, which are very important. For example, you can get measures on the number of tokens used per user turn, which is a very important metric to measure the cost of your system. Again, when using LLMs, cost can very easily stack up. So you want to make sure that you can have the evaluations for that. And especially later on, when you want to compare, if you are experimenting with smaller models, for example, you should also look at the latency So how long your users will have to wait to get a response. And we all know that high latency can really affect the user experience. And then also accuracy as well. So like how well your assistant is capable of handling the conversations the right way and actually completing the tasks. And maybe at this point, Hugo, you can maybe quickly switch to the code space and we can show an example of how those end-to-end test conversations look like. So
Absolutely.
if here in the main directory, you can stay in the CALM LLM or any of these folders, because I think they all have some end-to-end.
No, I actually think we've got the end-to-end test externally.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
So we'll look.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah. Should we look at a happy path first, just like booking a car?
Yeah, so this is that example conversation that we later on, if we run end-to-end tests, we would compare our assistant's performance against. And this story here simply represents the conversation, actual conversation between the user and an assistant. And it's a very simple conversation which represents like the situation where everything goes well. It's a happy path. So the user asks for something, assistant responds in the right way. And then when we run end-to-end tests, assistant will actually try to predict those responses. And then we can actually get those measures of how well it performed and also get the measures on latency and everything else. And we want to have these kind of example conversations for end-to-end testing for as many, ideally all of the situations that we would like to make sure that assistant performs well at. So we have different skills in the end-to-end tests that we can look into. So we have happy paths. We also have, for example, context switch is another one good example. So here we have one, I believe, conversation that just shows an example of the conversation where the user changes their mind about a specific skill that they started the conversation with. Because they started with booking a car, and then later on they decided to just go to hotel booking. And then we have examples for other situations like cancellations or corrections and things like that. And you really have to make sure that you have these examples in place. So you can actually think about end-to-end testing as well as unit testing in traditional software development, that you want to be able to see how your system is performing against those expected outcomes. And also to make sure that when you are making changes to your assistant and improving, that you don't break it. Because at times you will have an entire team working on it. So you want to make sure that you can actually see how changes that you're making are impacting the performance of your assistant.
And the other thing, of course, you're speaking to there is test coverage, right? We want to just make sure that we have a variety of tests that cover what we think are the use cases, and then probably to iterate on that once we get users using the assistant as well.
Exactly, very important. And those actual conversations can really show you what are the gaps where you might need to add either more of the testing examples, and also maybe make some changes to your flow definitions and change the behavior or like what kind of responses your assistant is using at certain points. So all of this really helps you to improve your assistant also then based on real world conversations.
And anyone who's built anything like this previously will know that you can sit down before getting users and think through what you think users will say, and you will still be absolutely amazed at the wild things that people will say to a chatbot as well. And that's with any software which has freeform responses as well. You cannot predict what people will do. So Justa, we do have 15 minutes left, so I'm not sure we'll have time to cover all the rest of the slides. I would love to, in 10 minutes or so, just open the floor for general conversation and questions. So I'm wondering what you think the best path is now to talk about fine-tuning and that type of stuff.
Yeah, I think I can just very quickly, if you can move to the next slide. I think that is probably the most useful to understand why we need fine-tuning in the first place. And then I can share some resources for people to then play around with fine-tuning and learn more about it in their spare time. So we mentioned that a few times, and the reason why we had these two branches today for this exercise was because, well, with LLMs, you always have to think about a lot of things, but two of the key things that you have to keep in mind is that you want to have high accuracy, so good performance of these models, but then also you have to find the balance when it comes to cost and latency. We know that huge models like GPT-4 and others, they are great at performance evaluations, but they are quite costly, especially with Rasa. When you, as Alan mentioned, you have a lot of flexibility in where you use LLMs with CALM. Like you can use them for dialogue, you can use them for rephrasing, templated responses, and so on. So if you use that for a lot of components, costs can really stack up. So what we have been doing quite a lot at Rasa so far was experimenting with smaller models. So for example, taking llama 8 billion model and then fine-tuning it for a specific task. For example, the system that you're building, because off-the-shelf models that are available and that are smaller, some of them actually might produce still quite acceptable results, but often you will notice that they fall short for specific tasks that you might have for your assistant. So fine-tuning is a really great way to, in a very simplified manner, to take the knowledge of a bigger LLM and then feed that knowledge into a smaller LLM so that it performs better for that specific task. And we have two models as of today that were fine-tuned by the Rasa team. So one of them is, I will drop the links right in a second for that. We have 8 billion fine-tuned llama model, and also 13 billion is the one that is used for that other branch that is not using OpenAI models. And what we see is that they do provide quite good performance results, very comparable to big models like GPT-4, but the cost is much, much lower. And the best thing is that you can also host those models yourself and play around with them and fine-tune them even more for your use cases, work on improving them even better. And that's, I will finish my part with just saying that it's something that I personally would really like to see community to do more, to do experimentations. And if you are building assistants with Rasa and you fine-tune models, it would be really amazing if you could share your experience on Rasa forum or even on social. So write your experience up in a blog post somewhere and just tell us about like what kind of results you are getting, what works, what doesn't, so that we can all work together on finding these better, cheaper, but still very performant options to build good assistants. So yeah, I will share all of the resources that I have about fine-tuning for you as well, because we have really good scripts for running it as well. So I'll do that.
And please do also, you mentioned the Rasa forum, which is a great place to ask questions and chat with people about building all of these types of assistants as well. Yeah. So please do link to that. I will also just quickly, we have a blog post that we wrote on building assistants with Llama 8B. You may have linked to it, but I'll just pop it in here. Before we here to answer any questions, I think the other very important thing with respect to using self-hosted models is thinking through latency. And I'll lead this by saying that, you know, anyone who's tried to deliver business value using certain types of data and machine learning products knows that latency can cost you a lot of money. So Alan, maybe you can say a bit about why latency is important here, the challenges of working with vendor APIs, and how self-hosted models can help you a lot more here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think there's the practical sort of day-to-day aspects, and then there's the sort of strategic side of it, right? And I think when we first started Rasa back in 2016, you know, the first thing that we created was this open source library called Rasa NLU, and we pitched it as like, here's a drop-in replacement for the NLU API that you're using today. Because all the developers we were talking to all said that they wanted to be independent of, you know, some third-party API for like every single interaction with your app before you know what the user said, right? Imagine like you're building a mobile app and every single button has to go through some service before you know what button somebody clicked. And people really wanted to just control their own destiny in that regard and not be beholden to some third-party API. And so I think it's amazing that even though we've had all this progress in this new category of like giant models that maybe 2 years ago would have felt out of reach, that you can actually get the same performance with a much smaller model, like an 8B model. Even we've done some very promising experiments with 3 billion models that you can like very feasibly run and host locally, right? And that means you can like retain all the data. It means you retain all the control, all the ownership. I mean, just now we talked about like GPT-4. It's being deprecated from the APIs in a couple of months, right? So if your application relies on some quirks of GPT-4, like you're out of luck when that thing gets deprecated, right? So having a model that you own and control is just a very strategically important thing. The other side is that Rasa gets used a lot for voice and for telephony automation, right? And so a lot of our customers have their customer support phone go through like a Rasa automated assistant, and there you just need really fast responses. It can't take 2 seconds to get a response back, right? Really, like 500 millis to a second is the acceptable sort of level of latency. And a GPT-4 size model over the internet, with all the network latency plus the LLM latency and everything else, just can't get anywhere close to acceptable latency, right? So for a lot of our customers, they're like, look, we've got tens of millions of phone calls a year that we're automating. There's absolutely no chance that it's economically viable or like doable to run all this through an LLM. But of course, everybody wants that sort of next level experience, right? Everybody wants to build like the sci-fi version of their agent, right? And so that's what we've been enabling here, is to say, well, you can do that, and you can have the model, you can run it locally, you're not being metered, you're not paying by the token. You can run it on the same infrastructure as you're running the rest of your system, so it's like super quick responses. It's a much smaller model, of course, so you get your latency requirements down there. And that's, it's just a really important thing if you're not just toying around and playing and building like a cool demo agent, but you really want to build that like next level experience, but you also need to deploy it at serious scale.
Thanks, Alan. All of that is super helpful context, and it's just really nice to hear from your years, decades of experience in helping enterprise and Fortune 500 companies build this type of stuff as well. So we did have a slide talking about the fine-tuning recipe, but we won't go through that now in the interest of time. But I've linked to the blog post that's relevant there. I'd love to open the floor for questions and just thank you all for joining. And we know there's so much happening at the moment at the end of year and also at PyData Global. So we really appreciate you joining for this workshop. Also, once again, thanks to PyData, Tamara and Hugh and the team for hosting such a wonderful conference and hosting us. But with that, I'd love to open the floor for any questions we may have, and get a sense of what you all got out of it. I assume there's silence because everyone's just so impressed. Multilingual question.
I'm happy to take that one. Yeah, it's a good question, Felix. So it depends a little on how what your quality bar is. Put it that way, right? So if you're gonna go sort of cowboy style, what you can actually do is the rephrasing component. You can just tell it like rephrase the response in the whatever language the user is speaking to you, and just enable that everywhere globally. That's like order zero effort. Obviously it's a silly way to do things because you're live translating everything, even though maybe a lot of your stuff is translated. So the more sensible approach is you can define responses in each language, right? So you can define response templates for each of the languages that you support, and you can have it as like a user level variable, like what language the user is speaking, and then it'll pick the correct one. So I'll drop in a few seconds. I'll drop the link to the feature that enables that. It's called conditional response variations. You can also, it's a more general thing. You can have specific responses for specific types of users, whether that's like the country they're based in, the language they speak, the tier of subscription they have, whatever. So you can kind of, have different variations. So what that means is that you can have the same flows, and just use, responses in the same language. And most of these models are very, very good at understanding, quite a broad variety of languages, right? So even if you build all your flows and you build everything in English, as long as you have responses defined in the other languages, if someone comes in and speaks, Chinese or Polish or French or something like that, it will tend to perform quite well and tend to do the job of understanding quite well. Of course, like depends exactly which LLM you're using under the hood. Of course, if you're using a low resource language, then then it really starts to get interesting and tricky. But for a lot of languages, these models are really quite good at the understanding task.
Fantastic. I'd love to hear from anyone else. Any other questions, or is there anything at work you think you could do that would use this type of thing, or anything you'd like to experiment with? Well, then perhaps we can wrap up, and I'd just love to say, please do connect with us on LinkedIn. Ask us any questions there. Even better, on the Rasa forum as well, because there's a whole community of thousands of people who want to jump in. Oh, Christopher has said there is a question. What a statement! I love that.
I see it here. Are you using the system role in any way to make the accuracy better? To my knowledge, no. But that's the beauty of an open ecosystem. So if you want to give it a spin and tell us that you got some good performance out of it. I mean, we've had users come in and completely rewrite the prompt template for the command generator, in a way that worked better for them. So I've never believed in like one size fits all AI, and I think this is no different. So would be really curious what you see, and I would say both for Christopher, for your question there, and anyone else, like if a question comes to you, in the shower later today or tomorrow morning or whatever, do come on the Rasa forum, ask a question. I'll drop the link in here as well. And loads of us hang out on there ready to sort of answer your questions. Oh, you already shared the link. Perfect. Very good.
Awesome. Well, thank you all once again for your great questions, your great engagement. Thanks, Alan and Justa, for bringing your expertise as always. And thanks, PyData, once again. And looking forward to seeing you at more of the conference as well.
Thank you all very much. Thanks for joining.
Thank you everyone for questions as well. It was great.